Rachel.
Hi, Claire.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Awesome, thanks. Hi, Rachel. Hi, viewers at home. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight for Tuesday Talks, Inishnua's online series of artist interviews. My name is Claire Moyer. I'm the Associate Director and Literary Manager for Inishnua, and my guest tonight is Rachel Brodeur, who has acted in 3 productions with Inishnua within the last 5 years, one of which garnered her a Barrymore nomination, congratulations, this past year for Box Clever, as well as our Mandel revival of Dublin by Lamplight, which was co-produced with Drexel University, and the monologue play Hooked. So thank you so much for joining us, Rachel.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so before we begin tonight's conversation, these Tuesday Talks were planned a while ago, and we wanted to make sure before we began to take a moment to acknowledge the recent events in our city and country, and to state that Inishnua believes that Black Lives Matter and supports the right of our fellow Philadelphians to protest and have their voices heard. We are outraged at the Black lives that have been lost. We challenge ourselves to work to better understand systemic racism, our own complicity in the system, and to do better. As part of our Tuesday Talk series, we're encouraging our audience to order from locally owned restaurants. Whether you're eating dinner while you watch this chat at home or have plans to order out this week, we'd especially like to encourage you to support Black-owned restaurants. Philly Mag has a great list for you to start from across the Philadelphia area, and Jess will be sharing that in the chat, so you can take a look at that. Thank you, Jess. There's also a great resource people may not be aware of. It's called Black and Mobile, and it's an app. It's locally created, and it's basically like a Grubhub for Black-owned restaurants. So it does the work for you, and it's delivery. So it's another great way to access these restaurants and support a community. Rachel and I also spoke, and we wanted to make sure before we started diving into talking about theater and Rachel's work, to share some resources and organizations to know about to support the Black Lives Matter movement. And there's many impressive organizations working to address systemic racism both in our community and nationally. So Jess has posted the slide for you. Thank you so much. And is also going to share those links in the chat, which we really encourage everyone to take a look at them after the fact when you have a moment to explore these websites. They're really, really comprehensive and a really impressive resource. So Rachel, can you share anything specifically about what about these organizations or resources stood out to you?
I took Blackout Tuesday to take time off from social media and really make sure I'm educating myself on how I can help Black Lives Matter. And something that I found really useful were these 2 resources that are listed here. So the blacklivesmatters.card.co is really great because it has different places where you can sign petitions that maybe you haven't seen before. It has ways to donate, organizations that are doing a lot of work, a list of the victims. And it also, something I thought was really interesting that I hadn't seen before, is it also lists a way that you can give back if maybe financially you're not able to donate to some of these organizations right now. So there's videos you can watch, and by just letting the commercials run, you're actually giving money to these organizations. So I thought that was a really helpful resource if you're trying to learn more of what you can do. And the second one from NewYorkMag.com, 115 ways to donate to support Black Lives Matters and communities of color, is really great because it has all sorts of organizations. So maybe there's something, I've been reading a lot about how we need to pick our lanes. You're gonna find what speaks to you and how you can help the Black Lives Matter movement. We're not all gonna do the same things, and that's important. We all need to do what our strengths are. And so I thought that was really great, and maybe exploring some of the organizations and seeing which one fits best for how you wanna help the movement.
I think that's a great comment about that. Like, each person has their lane. There's a place where each person can support in the way that they feel best able to.
Yeah.
I went through some of these resources on my own as well, and I was really impressed with the equal. Sorry, I wrote down what it's called. Equal Justice Initiative. I always get letters reversed. They do a lot to end mass incarceration, to combat racial injustice, and I was really impressed at their work among all of these, and I was really moved by it. So I made a donation, and I challenge everyone who's on here tonight to take a moment to look at these resources, organizations, and find a way that you can support, whether that's a donation, a petition, or to just advocate for Black lives. So thank you all for taking the time to do that. And thank you for that, Rachel. Before we begin the interview, and I am looking over my shoulder sometimes so I can check my notes, I want to just have a reminder that we are going to be taking questions. If you go down to the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see there's a Q&A button rather than the chat button. And so those are going to come to me, and I'll keep an eye on them. Anything that Rachel says along the way, anything you want clarification on, and then we'll answer some questions at the end of this. So please take advantage of that. And you're going to see throughout that we are sharing a little bit of supplemental material. Rachel provided some amazing photos. We have some production photos as well. So those will be popping back and forth between the video and those. Bear with us as we're figuring it out. It's our first Tuesday talk, and you know, technology is a great thing, but it can be complicated sometimes. So Jess is helping us out with that. So thank you so much, Jess. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, I'm glad it's just not Claire and I, you know, I'm glad everyone showed up. Thank you.
I prepared all these questions just for us to have a chat over coffee. So Rachel Brodeur has called Philly home for 10 years and counts her lucky stars that she's been fortunate enough to work with several amazing Philadelphia theater companies, including Inishnuah, Quintessence Theater Group, PAC, the Arden Theater, and others. She's been able to work on the classics, US premieres, new work, devised pieces, and work that has let her sing, dance, explore dialects, and play in her favorite style of theater, clowning. When not on stage, Rachel spends her time working as a nanny and as the actor, trainer, and liaison at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, which we'll talk a little bit about later. During quarantine, Rachel has been able to discover a love of gardening and cooking, and even found some time to paint, draw, and dance from her home in Bella Vista. She looks forward to getting back on stage in Quintessence Theater Group's Dreams and Madness repertory, which was moved from the spring to the fall, correct?
Correct.
Great. Coronavirus permitting.
Corona permitting.
Corona permitting. That is the world of theater these days, unfortunately. So we're going to start at the very beginning with a reference to The Sound of Music. You're originally from New Hampshire.
Yes.
How did you find your way to Philadelphia?
It was definitely a roundabout way, and not, I think, where I would have thought I was ending up if you had asked me, you know, when I was younger. I've been active in theater since I was a baby. My first show, I think, was age 5. I've been dancing since I was 3. I started with Russian folk dancing, which is a little uncommon. Most little girls start with ballet, but I started with Russian folk. So it's given me some wonderful calf muscles, really thrilled. And it's the love of dance that has carried me through and carried me into theater. I went to college at the University of New Hampshire for theater, and I found myself in lots of places before I landed in Philly. I lived in London, I lived in New York City, I lived in Wisconsin, and I lived in Manheim, Pennsylvania, which is actually how I found my way to Philly. I'd visited Philly when I was younger. I have an uncle who lives here, so I was somewhat familiar with the city. And I came in with a partner to go see an Old Crow Medicine Show concert, actually.
Oh, yeah. Love them.
They're so good. It was a good concert. And I happened to come in during Fringe, and it was at a point where we were trying to decide where we wanted to move. And I was really I fell in absolute love with all the theater. There was so much theater happening. And I just felt like I was falling upon theater and theaters and theaters. And I was like, this is great. So it seemed like a really good compromise. My partner didn't want to move to New York. I didn't want to move to Chicago because I was so far from home. So that's how we ended in Philly. And I've been here ever since.
I had a similar experience, actually. I remember coming to Philly and having a friend show me around. And I was like, how did I not know this was all happening? I feel like you spend, as a young person in theater, everything is so New York focused, and you turn this corner and you're like, oh, there's this whole other world and so many amazing cities making art I didn't even know was there.
Exactly. Yeah.
And a community and a kind of art that you maybe wouldn't be able to make other places. You know, each city is unique to that, which I think is exciting.
Yeah.
So once you moved to Philly, were there any companies or experiences that particularly made you want to stay here or that helped you to build your career?
Yes. So I actually originally moved here. I was I think I was on my second interview for the Arden Apprenticeship. Arden is a theater here in Philadelphia. So that's when I moved here. I unfortunately didn't get it, which is very sad, but I'm okay. And then it's been a minute. I'm okay. But it was definitely rough goings. I just had a lot of lovely gigs, but I only worked gigs for about 2 years. And then Alex Burns with Quintessence Theater Group took a chance on this girl that nobody could vouch for. I moved here knowing not a soul in theater, and he offered me Nina in Quintessence Seagull, the Seagull, and I fell in love with the show. I fell in love with the theater. I got to know the theater community through this. It's actually fun tie-in how I met next week's guest, Jameson Foreman. He played my
yeah.
So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
It's a small world in Philly theater, to be honest.
Very small world. One of my first theater friends.
Sorry?
He's one of my first theater friends.
I love it. That's amazing. No, that's such a beautiful picture. And that is quite a role to dive into for a Philly premiere, especially if you've not gone to university. You know, like so many people start by going to college here, things like that. It's like from 0 to 60 to be like, and you're Nina and the Seagull.
Right.
No pressure.
It was a lot. I was really fortunate. I had a lovely cast and support team with me, which made all the difference. But it was my first lead since I was in college, and I was just trying to be like, this is fine. Everything's fine. I know what I'm doing.
I control this.
Yeah, I totally know what's happening. So I'm really thankful to Alex for taking a chance.
Yeah. No, that's such a role. I feel like a role like that comes with such pressure because they're, you know, like it's like Juliet or something like that, where everyone has been thinking about it since they were a certain age, and every great actor of a generation has played it.
Which is something I don't think I fully grasped. I was familiar with the Seagull. I knew Nina. I had many women come up to me and go, "This is a role of your lifetime. You'll never get a role like this again." And I was like,
cool.
Okay.
No pressure. That's amazing. I mean, good for you, because that could easily scare some people off. So
yeah, thank you. And it kept me in Philly. So
yeah, and that built a relationship with Quintessence and sort of led to other work.
Oh yes, yes. I consider them family. I've been with them now. That was season 2, and the rep was supposed to be the end of season 10. We'll now hopefully start season 11. So it's been a lovely long relationship.
Yeah, I feel like Philly's like that. People build relationships, and even if the theater doesn't necessarily have a company, directors get to know actors. They build relationships with them. They trust them. Build relationships with the designers and these sort of de facto, not companies, but orbits of artists work around different theaters. So then you eventually made your way to Inishnuwa. Your first experience working with Inishnuwa was on Hooked by Gillian Grattan. You played a young single mother who had just had her child taken away from her by social services after a terrible accident, and who was basically run off to her grandmother's house in a small town in Ireland to sort of recuperate. And she kind of gets caught up in all the local drama, whether she wants to or not. This was a monologue show that Inishnuwa produced at Fergie's. So was this your first time tackling an Irish play with an Irish accent, and what was that like for you?
So technically, no. In college, I had done a scene from the Playboy of the Western World, but my approach to dialect work at that point was I just watched The Quiet Man. So I probably sounded like a leprechaun and insulted anyone who was actually Irish. Luckily, when I got to really tackle it with Hooked, we had a lovely dialect coach, Elaine Kelly, and then I also was fortunate enough to have a good friend and be working with someone on one of my survival jobs who's from Dublin. So whose name is also Claire.
Oh, what a great name.
So it was really, really helpful to be immersed with that. And I feel like a poor thing. I just followed her around for a little while and she was like, what are you doing?
That's how
And
you
then,
gotta do it.
right? And that was the thing is I just lived with it. And it's now, I think out of all the dialects I do, this is the one that I feel most comfortable with, which was probably because it's a monologue show, honestly, because you say so much.
Yeah.
And then the last piece that made it really helpful to just ingrain it in my brain was Jillian actually came to see the show.
Yeah.
And nothing stresses you quite like making sure you're A, saying the right words, but B, also making sure you're not butchering her dialect when your playwright is in the audience. So I tried to make sure I sounded authentic.
That's awesome. Yeah, I feel like I think people often think that dialects or accents on stage are kind of something people turn on and off, right? Because there are those actors or comedians you see who are kind of virtuosic in that.
Mm-hmm.
But really, it's just a lot of work. It's a lot of detail work. It's a lot of like almost like charting things out like it's music. When we work with a dialect coach on pretty much every play at Inishnuwa, often Len Kelly, but not always. And like actors' scripts are covered in notes when because of the dialects and needing that guidance. And and you have to start somewhere, even if it's The Quiet Man. Like that's a place to start. And yeah, we all look for resources.
Yeah, and that's I think the fun perk of when you get to do dialect work. I often discover new TV shows that I wouldn't normally watch. I am now familiar with way more BBC than I was prior to working with Inishnuwa. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, it opens up a whole world too, doesn't it? It's like in some ways it's like learning a different language, right? When you realize that like there's whole other ways of expressing a feeling or a situation or that are just words or phrases that you would never have used or put together. I feel like it's always really exciting to see that kind of click into place.
Yeah.
So with a monologue show, right, it was you and two other actors, Inishnuwa fan favorites, Corinna Burns and Charlie Del Marcel.
Yes.
And essentially, you're sort of on your own the whole time, even though you're performing with other people the whole time.
Yes.
So how do you prepare for a show that's built around monologues, especially when, at least in the experience I've had, I feel like most actor training and most productions you're going to be in are based on scenes and based on dialogues, and doing 10-minute monologues on your own is a really different beast.
Oh, yeah. It's completely different. So the main thing I noted was Hooked was actually a pretty large challenge for me. I think before that I maybe had I think The Seagull had been my longest monologue, and it's 3 pages, her Act 4 monologue. So then it's like
it's quite a monologue still.
It's quite a monologue. Not quite Hooked.
No.
So it was like the difference is though, for most shows, I find I always do my homework. I'm just that nerd. But for a monologue show, it becomes much more pivotal to do your work at home versus a lot of times you come in with a base, you do your homework, but then you go in and you recognize a lot of things are going to change given, what the other actors bring to the table. And that will completely affect the dynamic of the scene. Where you don't have that for a show like Hooked. It's just you. And so the focus then for me became making sure these stories that she's telling are so vivid in my brain and just feel real. And Hooked had another wonderful challenge because we were at Fergie's, which is amazing, and I 10 out of 10 would recommend. But we also had some really fun challenges. I remember I was doing a monologue about almost drowning my son. Meanwhile, downstairs on the first floor, there was a bachelorette party and a woman was drunkenly singing "I Love Rock and Roll."
Sure. It's the atmosphere that you're looking for in yes.
But it got to the point where it was because it helped me build the world because I was able to block all of that out. It's like this little bubble, which is kind of the opposite than what you do in a normal show when you're engaging, you're creating the bubble with people, because I was creating my bubble by myself. So that was really fascinating, just that difference and all the ways it still evolved and still flourished, but it was mostly when I'm like sitting at home and stewing on all the things that Lydia had to stew on.
I think it's interesting your comment about working at Fergie's. We do a lot of shows at Fergie's. This was a slightly larger show because we were transitioning between spaces, but of course we do our annual pop-up play at a pub. And I don't think, I mean, it asks a bit of the audience of engaging, right? You have to kind of tune stuff out as well as an audience. But the challenges of working in a space that's not built for theater are just like, you don't realize them until you're in that space. And Fergie's is just the most wonderful place. It is like, they are warm and inviting, and they could not be more supportive. But they can't control when, you know, someone's radio on their car is loud outside, things like that. So all these things that you work so hard to control when you're in a theatrical space, sound, light, you know, temperature, even, like, you just can't control when you're in any sort of site-specific space. And it asks a lot of not just actors, but also audience to like stay engaged and be in that place with the actors. And every time you go into a new site-specific place, you know, you figure it out. Each one is different.
And it was really remarkable. The audience, I never heard an audience member complain or scoff when they heard noise downstairs. They were completely with us, which is really a wonderful gift. And I think it actually Fergie's lended itself to the show.
Totally,
because it's so intimate. It was just like, we're telling you a story at the bar and the pub. So
and it takes place in a small town in Ireland, and like it felt really right for that show. It was a great one, and that was directed by Tom Ring. And was a great piece. So we just shared a few photos of that, and I actually got in the chat, I don't know if you can see this, Rachel, but Len Kelly is also on this, listening at home. Hello, Len. And he says, I loved working on dialects with you. So there you go. Thanks, Len.
Thanks, Len.
Also, just a reminder while we're chatting with Len at home, that there is still the option to pop a Q&A down at the bottom, so we'll get to those at the end. But if you have any questions as they come up, or if you have messages like Glenn did, or if you saw these shows and had any comments, please make sure to chime in. All right, so that was Hooked. So your next show was actually Inishnua's third edition of Dublin by Lampley.
Yes.
Your first time on it.
Yes.
In a collaboration between Drexel University and Inishnuwa. So Drexel University has a grant, and each year they bring in a professional theater company to work with students. So half of the cast is professional, half is students, and it's a mix of professionals and students making this show come about, which is just an amazing thing to be a part of. So there's a photo of the cast. So Rachel and Mike Dees, who's the taller gentleman in the back, were the professional actors, and the other 4 actors are all students who were genuinely amazing in this. So Dublin by Lamplight tells the story of the founding of the Abbey Theatre in Dublin, and is performed in a very heightened style, as you can see, with actors taking much of the dialogue to the audience and wearing clown makeup. This sort of over-accentuate their face. The show and the corresponding style of clowning was created by a theater company in Ireland called the Corn Exchange. So they created this show for their company that specializes in this. So can you tell us a little bit about the show itself and the overall style of it?
Yes. Oh,
yeah. So there you are.
I surprised myself. So yes, this show takes place, it's the founding of the Abbey Theatre, and it's supposed to be, we're about to open the show. I play Eva, as seen here, who is the diva, if you will, of the theater, also the money. And what's interesting about this show is some of the characters are completely just absorbed in starting this theater, while you have other characters who are very aware of the world around them. And so we're trying to put this show up. Meanwhile, there are protests erupting everywhere around us. And at the end, you see those kind of collide. So
very cool.
Yeah. And so the style that you see here, it was created by the Corn Exchange, which the theater company was founded by Annie Ryan. And it's a really lovely mixture. And I do want to point out, not all their shows have this heightened style makeup that you see here, but it was used for Dublin. And it's a mixture really of clowning, commedia dell'arte, which for anyone who doesn't know is a traditional Italian style of theater that's usually done with masks, where you have very specific stock characters. So we took the stock character aspect, but instead of the masks, as you can see, we have this face makeup that it's a kind of a mixture of clown makeup, a mixture of what you would have seen in the masks. Some of the characters actually have elements that remind me of kabuki. And so it's a really interesting style that they've created. It's very structured, but at the same time, improv. When you're on stage, we had lines. It wasn't like we were improvising the scenes, but it was to get to where we got, you have to improv and just find the elements to make your character. And there's little bits or little scenes, which is similar to something called epic theater. So you have little transactions and bits, and we take most of it to the audience to make sure, are you with us? Good. So it was a really interesting style to explore. And I had worked with epic theater and I had worked with commedia and clowning, and it was really fun to just smush them all together.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by clowning? I know you have some experience with clowning, so I want to dive into that. But I think, you know, when a lot of people hear the word clowning, they think like, oh, that person who makes, you know, balloon animals, or, you know, trips and falls on big shoes at the circus. And it wasn't until I went to drama school that I learned that there's this whole genre of performance. And I knew I had seen it because I watched Bugs Bunny cartoons and, you know, things like that. But there's a whole genre of performance that falls under clowning. And can you give a little bit of explanation of what that is and then what your previous experience of it was?
Absolutely. So clowning, so to give everyone an idea, the kind of clowning that we're talking about, if you've ever seen the Marx Brothers, Harpo is a perfect clown in the style that I was trained in. So I was lucky enough when I was in college, we did a commedia workshop, an intensive workshop for, I think, 2 weeks. And then there I am, yay. And then a whole semester of clowning. We studied a style called Lecoq, which is based in physicality. So I actually did not speak as a clown until I graduated and was hired for different jobs. My clown that you see here, her name was Daisy, and that was literally the only word she could say was Daisy, and she couldn't even say that right, bless her heart. So, but yeah, so clowns like this, other than being highly physical, we learn about something called clown logic. And clown logic is a lot of fun. So most people, if you found a diaper, I don't know, a diaper on the ground, you're like, this is a diaper, it goes on a baby. A clown would find it and be like, what an excellent pillow. This is my pillow now. No one else's, it's mine, I love it, it's my favorite thing in the world. And people don't like the pillow, you might try to like calm the pillow and like, it's okay, pillow. They don't understand you like I do. So things like that, it's clown logic. We also learned the stereotypical things like juggling, which actually was my only F in any of my theater classes.
I remember that. I remember that part of clowning class. It did not go well.
No, failed that hard. My only F, it's fine. But yeah, we just learned, so clown logic, the physicality. We also use something called Le Bon, which is a style that I use in every show I've ever done, where you learn about leading points. So if you look at people walking down the street, some people tend to lead with their nose, some people lead with the top of their head, some people lead with their pelvis, their knees, their feet. And it might not be as crazy exaggerated. It might just be like someone who tends to walk like this. When you're a clown, you take that and you just make it even bigger. So we used that a lot and learned about that. And then I was lucky enough to get to use clowning, which is, I was really surprised how many clowning jobs are out there. My very first job out of college involves so much street improv. I once got in an hour fight with a Swedish fish, and then I got mad at him and threw him in a pond, and I had to go get him, and he was sticky. It was a big mess.
Poor clown.
I know, and I was very upset that my Swedish fish was melting. It was bad. And then I was lucky enough to do, there she is.
Oh.
Joan was her name.
Nice.
And
clowning brings out the best in all of us, doesn't it?
It really does, and it's so much fun. And then I was lucky enough to do clowning shows with Quintessence, and then for Dublin. So
that's awesome. I love it. I think it's one of those sort of explorations of physical theater and understanding that really is applicable beyond simply like comedies.
Oh,
and so much of it is about like understanding the stock characters, understanding physicality. Yeah, I think it's really core to a lot of actors training now, which people might not realize if they're seeing like dramatic actors, but they've also spent all this time learning how to like fight a Swedish fish.
Fight a Swedish fish and then make up with a Swedish fish.
Yeah, my clown was named Constance.
Ah!
Yeah.
I love that name.
Yeah, she had bows in her hair. It was a different time. So one of the other great things about the Mandel residency and the Drexel program there is that you get to work with students. I don't know how much you've worked with students in the past, but how does that affect your role in the rehearsal room? How does that affect the rehearsal process, the production? Like, what was that like?
So I have worked with students for a very long time. I was a camp counselor for many years, and I was the director of our dance program, our archery program. I've worked as a choreographer. Had I ever been a role model as an actor. So that was really interesting. And I was really lucky. It was such a wonderful group. And I got paired with Mike Dees. So also, and he's done this before. So it was easy to like follow his lead. The thing that I took away from it more was reminding myself what I was like in college, and just making sure I was communicating to the best of my ability to show them maybe the best ways to communicate because I know a lot of times I would have just sat with stuff and like, well, I don't want to bother them. They're directing, whatever. So I would just, when I had questions for Tom, I would make sure I'm like, so here's my question. I want to make sure this is why I want to know, just so they would see that's okay to ask questions. That's part of the exploration, and maybe different ways to communicate those questions.
I think that's a really good point. Like one of the things you're not taught, I mean, I wasn't taught, maybe you were, as an actor or director or artist in training, I was maybe taught it a little bit more in training to be a director, is like that communication, right? Yeah. And how you talk to people, and that also the collaborative environment of creating theater in a university setting is a beautiful thing, and it's not the same as doing it in a professional setting, which is a different kind of beautiful thing. Yeah. And learning that, I think, is really important. We have not a question or an answer, but we have a comment from Mike Dees. So, hi, Mike Dees! On this, hi, Mike Dees. So Mike Dees was also in Dublin by Lamplight. He'll be joining us for our final Tuesday talk of the month, and he was in, I believe, all 3 versions of it. So Mike says, don't let this go to your head. Rachel was a joy to work with during Dublin. She brings such a light to the rehearsal room. I'm assuming she does that with every show she works on, which is why companies love to keep working with her. Thanks, Mike. That's so nice. I'll frame that and send that to you. All right, so we're going to move on to your third and your most recent Inishnoa show, Box Clever. So this was last season. It was a 2-person show. Yep. I know, we've got the best photos of you. This is what clowning is, right? Yes. So you were nominated for a Barrymore Award for it. And I feel like the show, I'm assuming that a lot of people here tonight have seen it just because it was a more recent show, but maybe they haven't. So can you share with us why the show was particularly challenging for you?
So I was given the magical gift from Tom Ring to play 24 different characters with over 10 different dialects in under 90 minutes with no new costumes. What you see there is what I wore. And we did not leave the stage. It was me and sweet, sweet Ruby Wolf just playing off of each other. And it was...
No pressure.
No pressure. It was... a very unique and beautiful gift.
So how do you create 24 different characters under those limitations? So I love this photo. I think it's great.
I love that one.
Yeah.
So that's a really good question. And I actually was lucky enough. I had understudied, so I never had to do it. Thank God. But I had understudied a show where I was supposed to play, I think it was 14 characters. And then I've had a quintessence track where I played 3 characters. So I had that under my belt and I was like, great, cool. But before we even stepped foot in the room, about a month before, what I did was I just read the script and read the script. And when I went through, I would focus on some of the different characters and I would see what came to mind. So when you come in with this many characters, it's really important you're not coming in at neutral. So what I did is I created a base, and the base can be many things. I've had bases be paintings, but usually my bases are characters from shows, animals, maybe a dialect or a voice or a sound that I associate with the character. And so I come in with that. So for example, the character you see most of me, I think that's accurate, is Fifi, the social worker. She's very snooty. So she's actually based off of Emily Blunt's character in The Devil Wears Prada. But
yeah,
so,
okay, I see it.
yeah. And then if anyone's familiar with the internet famous dog, Tuna, he has a very extreme overbite. One of my other characters is based off of him.
And exactly what you're talking about. That's amazing.
But it's one of those things, I'm not going in there and I'm not going to be Emily Blunt's character. But so you have a base. And then when I got in the room with Ruby and I was getting, information back from Ruby, these characters formed into new creations altogether, but they have this base. And so once I have this base, I can lean into the physicality, and sometimes you have anchors. So because I was Fifi the most, Tom, I had a conversation with Tom about letting me have a coffee cup. So it just helps you, okay, because this is the character, this is my touchstone character. This is the character I come back to the most. So she's the one that she's, body-wise, she's pretty close to neutral for me. And so it just allows you to then go out and in without them melting into each other and trying to keep those different characters nice and clean.
Gotcha. And of course, Ruby was only playing one character throughout, so you're also like helping navigate the story by creating these different characters for her to interact with, essentially.
It was funny because, I understand what a supporting role is, but I was like, no, I literally, because what my character is like a manifestation of everything. Ruby told pretty much the whole story. So I'm just sitting there trying to help create that world for the audience, and just literally every person she comes in contact with was me.
And I remember you seeing because we were talking about dialects earlier and how much sort of work goes into it. You had little charts and tracks of this long piece of paper of where things went and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because that was something that really helped me, is my background in a dancer, and I actually don't think I was fully aware of that I used this so much until Box Clever, because it became choreography to me. And we actually had one rehearsal where I just danced. I danced through the show and just found my different marks, and it really, really helped. And that helped also keep the physicalities clean. And yeah, I had little reminders. You're like, you're the real estate agent.
Yeah.
We're like, okay. And so I had a little cheat sheet, I had a little toy box and inside, but by the end of the run, I wasn't looking at it. I was very proud of myself.
I feel like people also don't realize that's pretty common for there to be show runs backstage and things like that to remind people, because actors are brilliant, but they're not magic. And especially I think Inishnuwa has so many shows that move around in time, that have direct address, where have actors playing different characters. So it is not uncommon. There's a charts and graphs side to theater that people don't necessarily see when they're in an audience. I know I have a lot with shows that are obviously I didn't direct Box Clever, but when I've done shows where there's a lot of transitions and stuff, I will the number of Excel spreadsheets involved to make sure I understand who's who and who's saying what.
Yeah.
Very involved.
I've definitely come off of, God bless assistant stage managers. I remember there was one show where I was during previews and I just came off and she's quick changing me and I said, "Who am I?" "You're the princess, go."
Great. Thank you. At least someone knows what's going on.
I was like, okay.
That's amazing and also totally understandable.
Yeah.
Awesome. So that's kind of our recap of Inishnuwa shows. You had mentioned that you work with Quintessence a bunch, and you touched on that a little bit, so I'm just going to sort of combine these questions and ask about what kind of work have you done with Quintessence? And I know since they're a classical theater, how do you tackle shows that you do at Quintessence differently than when you're working with, say, Inishnuah or another company, or do you tackle them differently?
Yeah, so yeah, Quintessence and I have a lovely long history, and I'm really thrilled to be back with them currently, hopefully currently. This will be my 6th, 7th, and 8th show with them, because we are doing 3 shows at once. Yeah, so I've been with them since their 2nd season, so 8 years. Yeah, and so Quintessence and Inishnuah actually have a lot in common. So both theaters have a focus on the storytelling aspect. So they're really actor focused. So what that means is, in both cases, we don't have necessarily the large flamboyant sets. It's not, I don't like calling it a spectacle, but it's more based on, we're telling you a story. We want to make sure that you hear this story. And so the focus becomes on the actors in that story, which I love. And so that respect, I think they're actually very similar. And then I would say, I mean, in Quintessence, actually, I have done a premiere, but in the most part, with Inishnuah, I've done 2 US premieres with Inishnuah. And it's been really interesting to adapt and mold the new work. And then also when you have these classics, so there is that echo, like we were talking about with Nino, there is an echo of the people who have done these roles before. And yeah, I just think, I guess there's a link that is actually quite common. So the link switches a little. So the link for Inishnuah, for example, is we're using the language and we want to make sure the audience can come along with us. So we need to do everything we can to make sure, even though there's a dialect, usually, even though there's probably language that the audience has never heard before, we're going to make sure this is something that they can follow, and they're like, okay, I'm coming with you on this journey. And I think Quintessence actually is a very similar battle, but instead of the dialect, it's usually, hey, we're going to hear some Shakespeare or Marlowe, we're in verse, but we're going to do everything we can to make sure that language is crystal clear and that you can come with us on this journey. And so keep that focus on the storytelling.
That's really cool. I've never thought about it before, but obviously, like, the classical text work carries over to other productions, but specifically when you're having to tackle dialects, that's like a different type of communication challenge, in the same way that the structure of Shakespeare's language is not how you would necessarily talk, just the way the structure of an Irish accent is not necessarily how you would talk.
Right.
So it's a lot of the same tools. That's really cool. And I did want to touch on the fact that in this world of classical theater, you've played Ophelia twice, which, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Once in college and once at Quintessence. Yeah, a really easy, light role to tackle. What's that like? What's it like? Yeah, just easy. What's it like doing a part twice in 2 different productions with 2 different directors?
So what made this one specifically really interesting is this picture that we're seeing right here from the University of New Hampshire is actually the bad quarto. So this is the version of Hamlet that we're not sure Shakespeare actually wrote. It's actually believed a bunch of actors who had done the Hamlet that we all know and love went and tried to pretty much write it out and just got a bunch of lines wrong. Like, to be or not to be is actually to be or not to be. There's the point.
Yeah, a little less poetry to it.
Yeah. So the girls, I will say, both Gertrude and Ophelia made out like bandits. We had some really sassy comebacks. There's just like,
yeah, Gertrude and Ophelia are much more developed in the bad quarto.
Yes, I found very interesting. So it was in that way unique, and then also time. Just, I was a very different actor in this photo than I was when I was with Quintessence. And it's just, but Ophelia has a very special place in my heart, and it's just how she shatters is, it makes sense to me in a very sad way. And it's one of those things that I think she's a character that often gets, I don't want to say a bad rep, but she just gets labeled as crazy. And you're like, no, let's look at the trauma that this poor person has gone through. So I thought it was really interesting also to I think in college I was still very much an emotional ball, and I couldn't really grasp the rational side of it, and just giving her all the flavors that it was with the Quintessence one, which you can see here with Sean Bradley. And it was just really lovely to come back to her. She was one that I think a lot of actors have this, where you play a role and then after it's done, you're like, I wish I'd thought of this or this aspect of her. And Ophelia was definitely, I think, the #1 character that I had done that with, where I was like, yeah, I wish I had thought of this. So it was really exciting to come back to her and give her a second life. So she's very special.
I mean, the challenge and the beauty of theater, right, is that it's a ephemeral art.
Yeah.
So to be given the chance, especially with a role as complicated and challenging as Ophelia, is pretty amazing. So we're getting close to time, so I'm just going to do one more question, and then we have a question from the audience, which we will get to. So when you're not acting, you currently work as an actor trainer and liaison at CHOP, right?
Yes.
Can you explain what that is and share about the specific program you work on?
Yes. So my program is, there's a national company or organization called Vital Talk, and Vital Talk has a little section at CHOP. And what we do is we help medical professionals learn how to deliver serious news in a compassionate way to families. So we're not standardized patients, which is something you have in medical school for testing. We hire professional actors, and we're pretty much improvising, and we're just behaving very truthfully under really sad circumstances to help the medical professionals learn to identify emotion and ways to maybe hold a patient while they're getting this news, either in also understanding that bad news for a family can be something where your child has to take medicine every day for the rest of their life, or life ending. And then how do we figure out what's important to that family so we know how best to help them, and just leaving space for the emotion. So that's in a nutshell, what we're working on. So my job there is I hire the actors, I direct the rehearsals with the actors, and I help write the scripts. So they don't have set lines, but they have a history, so they understand, they know the medical history of what's wrong with their kids, all those sorts of things. Of course, the actors need to know that. Or if we also work on supporting religious families or angry parents, and all sorts of different avenues. So if there's a religious family, making sure the actor understands that religion, and yeah, that's.
I think that's such an amazing thing. I know a number of people you work with. Obviously, I also know people who work as standardized patients and other different roles in helping to train medical professionals, obviously, of which there's a large community in Philadelphia. And when I learned about that after moving here, it really blew my mind that this, actors and theater makers specialize in humanity, right? And interpersonal relationships, and finding humanity in any situation, any person, and to be able to take that skill. And I really think it's really impressive that the medical schools and different training programs that exist embrace this and want it. I think that's really cool. Thank you for hearing that. So we have one question, which is, do you have certain criteria for accepting a job? And would you ever turn down a role, and why? Questions from Carolyn Fast. Thanks, Carolyn.
Hey, girl.
Carolyn?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Hey, Carolyn.
She's actually stage manager on several of those pictures that have.
Oh, great.
So, yes, I think, especially as you age, it's a gift that you get as you age. When you're young and out of college, we tend to accept lots of free work, or jobs where you're not paid, and shows that you're looking at that you're like, yeah, I really don't see the artistic fulfillment in that. But as I've aged, I've definitely turned down auditions for shows where I read the script and go, I don't really think that's serving the community well to be a part of this project. And then also I think artists' time is valuable, and I am most likely not going to accept work without pay, unless it's, of course, for a good cause. Like a lot of actors I know, we'll do fundraisers, things. We're not curious about it, but you know, if someone's like, "Here's a 6-week contract for $20," I'm like, "Thank you so much. Have a good day."
We raise hell when those contracts are out there. Right?
It's really shocking, and also people are like, "It's a great opportunity." I'm like, I've been acting for 15 years. But also, yeah, I just think there's just also shows that I don't appeal to me, so I wouldn't go out for.
Yeah. Any other questions for our friends or family back home? Because we're nearing about an hour, so I do want to kind of wrap up. We talked more than I expected, but it was all really great. So if we don't have any questions, I wanted to ask you my last question, just because I want to share our last slide, which is that you're an archer.
Yes.
Fun fact.
Yes.
So Jess will share the slide, but how did you become an archer?
I went to an amazing summer camp when I was 13 called YMCA Camp Coniston in New Hampshire, up in Sunapee region. And one of the first activities I did there was archery. I'm actually still friends with my archery instructor from that year. And I wasn't big on sports as a child, and archery just calmed me immediately. And I immediately, it's one of those things, if you're someone who likes rules, it's great because you're like, here are the rules, here I go. And then it actually followed me into theater. When I worked at the Renaissance Fair, I worked with a man who could shoot a bullseye from a football field away. I can't do that. I got to half a field away though. But yes, so, and I've now taught archery at 3 different summer camps, including Camp Bonfire, which is a summer camp for adults, which is run by a couple of other Philly theater members. And yeah, so it's just been always, I have a bow. You can't see it. It's behind me though. But yeah.
I just love that photo. We really just wanted to make sure it was in the slideshow tonight so people could see it.
I love that photo too.
We like capped the night with Russian dancing in this. Thank you so much, Rachel. This was so lovely to chat with you, to learn about your work. I'm always amazed. I was putting all this together at, I feel like every show I'm aware of you doing is particularly challenging, whether it's because you're paying 24 parts, it's clowning, there's dialects, it's, you know, Nina and the Seagull, it's Ophelia, right? I'm like, Rachel's never just like coasting, just like, oh, this whole thing. But I think that's what's amazing and impressive. And to go back to what Mike D said over the chat is, you know, part of why people keep hiring you, because you're a delight to work with. I'm gonna do, thanks. Thank you for taking the time to do this. I'm gonna do a little bit of business, which is a reminder to everyone that we'll have 3 more Tuesday talks for you to join. We'll be with Jameson Foreman next week, who you know from The Monster in the Hall, who's the music director on that, as well as an actor and music director on Midsummer, which is a few years back. On June 23rd, we'll have Jarrell Henderson, who directed Untitled, which is amazing. He'll be joining us, I believe, from Chicago. And then on June 30th, we'll have our friend Mike Dees, who's in the audience right now. Mike Dees has worked with Inishnua regularly for 14 years. So we'll have a lot of shows and things to talk about with Mike, some of which might overlap with our conversation here because of Dublin by Lamplight. So thank you all so much for joining us. And don't forget to go to the chat, take a look at the resources provided, as well as learn more about supporting Black-owned restaurants in the Philadelphia area. And have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, guys.